But there are an example here in the chest. This part of the body is dark in the negative. That means this is not in contact with the body, with the sheet. This is not in contact with the sheet. This is in contact, and this is far from the cloth. Maybe with this. This is in contact or near the cloth. And just this, very dark, is far from the cloth. But just in the part far from the cloth, we have a cloth of blood. Then the blood was not in contact with the cloth. What's your opinion?
We can only speculate. We can only offer explanations. We weren't in the tomb. We don't know what happened. But looking from the side, and I can tell you that the arms are missing, but the arms would have been like this. And you could get a little drape or fold on the arms. I'm not saying there was, but you could. And that could easily explain those dark marks by the biceps, where the inner bicep would have been. And I do not think that the body image or the blood marks were caused by contact. And the blood marks, I don't want to get into the technical explanations. It's just too long and involved, but it is in the book. But no, I don't think that's the explanation. And real quickly, the side vacuum, that's what I was trying to avoid, the complication of that. But picture, I'm trying to say real quickly why there wouldn't have been a side vacuum toward the side of the man. Picture a U-shaped bench where the body would have lied in the back, horizontal. Bob sent me the picture and showed me how the body won't fit horizontally or vertically. It only has to fit, it can only fit horizontally. Well, where the U is, whether his head is facing this way or that way, part of the cloth would be draped over the side. They're not that big. Typical first century tombs are not that big. The other side would have been over by the wall, and it would probably wrinkle a little bit. Also, I wanted to avoid these complications. When the body disappears, on a supine body, picture this, the body disappearing like this. Up and down. It could, nobody was there. But if it does, there's not going to be a side vacuum. There'll only be an up and a down. And it would raise the dorsal part of the cloth into the body image. It doesn't have to raise that much. There's not that much contact on the back. You take the scourge marks off of those dorsal images, and not only on the back, but all the way down the legs, you don't have a great deal of body image. On that black and white, you see blood marks, but there's not a great amount of body image. I would also like to say, of course it collapses down. That's where the three-dimensionality and the vertical directionality are. I've never seen there's not a three-dimensional information on the backside that I've ever read about. People get confused about this, but it wouldn't work in that direction. And I agree with all the things about dimensionality, and that's all some of the stuff in chapter 12 that I wanted to avoid, because it's just, you can't get it all in one presentation. But Bob's coming back, so I better get rid of the microphone so he doesn't hear what I say and we continue this discussion too long. But
I wish to make a comment to your question. This is a very good question that I wish to comment a bit because it is very interesting in the body image formation. Here we see a blood stain. I suppose that this was the question, and this is no image.
The question was, in this part of the body, the cloth was not in contact with the skin, and the blood is here when the cloth was not in contact.
But your question presupposes another hypothesis, that there is a proportionality between image intensity and distance of the cloth. This is only an hypothesis. As I have explained very quickly, we make reference to the corona discharge hypothesis. In the case of floating mannequin, we have to take into account to the Cousin law. I try to explain better. If we have to consider the perpendicularity of the radiation. Here I am supine and the radiation is vertical. The cosine is 1. If I consider an angle of 90 degrees, the cosine is 0. So if the cloth touches this area, the image intensity is 0 because it must be multiplied by the cosine. So in this position, the cosine is not 0, but near 0. And this we can explain the fact that there is a black area. Another explanation can be due to the folding. If you have a wrinkle, a folding, I have not the right term, perhaps there is a greater distance. And also in this case, you have a contact here, but not contact here. Another problem, the same problem is here. On the back image, here you see, it is not so evident, but here you see the blood stains, but no image. Why? According to Cousin law, you can try to find some explanation.
Questions?
Okay, it's enough for this question, but now I make another question, or with this presentation, I make doubt about the image is an distance effect or is a contact effect, because the collapse hypothesis, the collapse hypothesis imply not is necessary a radiation. Look at the image I prepared. This is the body wrapped with the cloth. If the body disappears and the cloth pass through where the body was, the cloth came in contact with the body, the rest of the body. Look, the hypothesis of mechanical transparency. The frontal part of the body passes through the body and is not necessarily a distance, but more time in contact with the body, more intensity it emits. But that explains only the frontal part, not the dorsal part. No image in the dorsal part. But in this, there are assumptions, maybe it's not evident, but there are an assumption that the gravity don't affect the body. The body, if the body is transparent, mechanically transparent, but has weight, has gravity, the body passes through the stone. It has no mechanical resistance, then pass through the stone. In this case, maybe the dorsal part of the cloth came in contact with the body. This is the follow of the, this is a slow simulation, and now is the body has weight and undergone the effect of the gravity, then pass through the stone and the dorsal part of the cloth. But in this case, the frontal part of the body don't pass through the body. Then we will have image in the dorsal part, but not in the frontal part. But I propose another way to disappear the body. Other way. This is a slow, how the body passes through the stone and the dorsal part. And now, another way to disappear. Disappear the body from outer to inside, as an onion. In this case, and with the effect of the gravity. In this case, the frontal and dorsal part go into the body little by little and inside the body. Look, the body disappears, but from outside to inside, and with the cloth, this is the effect. Okay, more hypotheses to analyze. Maybe you.
Maybe you. Thank you. Do I have to say something in response to that? Question.
Yes.
I have a question too. Can I read my question here, or do you want to go ahead with yours? Are you ready? Go ahead.
Hello. One is you keep talking about the face having information about 3 dimensions. I wanted to know if the body, the rest of the body has that same information, the 3-dimensionality. Anybody on the panel?
Mark would like to answer that question. Mark, answer that question.
Real quickly, the 3-dimensionality is along the frontal inner side of the body image.
Okay. Okay.
I haven't seen that established yet. Show me a picture where there's 3-dimensional relief with you know, that's taken from the information on the shroud. That's all I can tell you. I've never seen one, and But if you can demonstrate it in some way, please do. But
I have another question.
And then it'll come back to you.
Can I ask my second question?
Yes, you may.
Leofanti, the image that was obtained using the corona discharge, did that have any 3D information?
Yes, as I have shown quickly in my presentation, just Oswald Scheuermann made the experiment with a spherical object in contact with a sheet. And it resulted a so-called three-dimensionality because the part more in contact with the sheet produced a more intense image. The part more distant from the sheet produced a degrading color that can be transformed in a three-dimensional object. One thing is to make reference to a known object. Another thing is to make reference for the three-dimensionality to an image like this. Because there are many effects like those that I discussed with Cesar, connected perhaps to the Gaussian law. So I am convinced that the three-dimensionality that we can obtain from the image processing of the frontal and dorsal image is not it does not produce a real three-dimensional human body, because we should also take into account for some amplification of the imaging process due to parallel processing, if you want to, in a general way. If you want to go into details, we must, for example, in this area of the back image, consider the effect that the man was not like the position shown in the mannequin in the desk, but was with the leg just bent. And in this condition, we must consider many things. I have to add that we know very few about this image, and many other problems must be solved. And before to attain something that can be quite real, we have to work very much.
My talk was about protons. And I would like to say that protons would give a faithful image depending on how far away the shroud was from the body. But unfortunately, I can't say that, because at the beginning of the proton path, through air or through linen, it's going so fast that it actually doesn't lose much energy because it doesn't spend any time in an area where it can transfer energy to the surroundings. So it's only at the very end that it loses its energy, which in that sense would say that if the shroud were far away from the body, then it would give a more intense image than it would if it were close by. So even though I gave a talk on protons, I can't say that it would produce a representative image based on distance. However, it does produce a lot of the the things we see on the shroud, with like striation of the image, the fact that all of the image fibers are the same color, but they're more in the dense areas than in the lighter areas. So there's similarities, but the distance relationship doesn't hold.
In the chromosome hypothesis, there's a wavelength, 193 nanometers, or 188 nanometers, should I say, for the chromosomes. And depending on the tissues of the body, how much water there is in those tissues, there's going to be a wavelength outside the body where the shroud is. So if it's acting like a little antenna, you're going to get three regions. You're going to get a near-field region, you're going to get a Fraunhofer region, I think it is, a Fresnel region, sorry, and you're going to get a far-field region. So who was the lady who asked that, the first part of the question? Was it you about the face? Are there any other areas beside the face? I think you would find with the chromosome theory, or the biophotonics theory, hypothesis, sorry, that yes, there would be embedded there a three-dimensionality. Okay, who's up?
Yes, I have a question submitted to me. Let me read it. It was addressed to me, but others can participate, of course. From a previous presentation yesterday, I remember a picture of a bunch of soda straws representing linen microfibers. One, the discoloration of the image, as I understand, covered the full circumference of the affected microfibers. Two, some microfibers were not discolored along their length, even though adjacent to microfibers that were discolored for their full length. Please explain how these two characteristics are possible with a vertical radiation. Shall I attempt here a response first of all? And then you can join in if you'd like. Yes, well, you know, my concept here, as I understand it, of the discoloration mechanism is actually not a single-step process, it's a multi-step process. That radiation, of some type of radiation, either charged particles and or ultraviolet, would then create probably a charge on the shroud, inner and possibly also outer layers of the shroud. And once that charge is established to a certain extent, it then discharges off of the high points of the fibers like a lightning rod effect. Now, I think of a thunderstorm going over a flat area of land with multiple lightning rods up, and what's going to happen? The lightning is not going to hit all of the lightning rods. And so that would be my answer here. That once the lightning hits the first lightning rod, then that path is established for reduction of the charge between the ground and the air. And so that you then have electrons flowing from one lightning rod to the next. Same thing that we should establish a discharge, a corona discharge from one fiber. Then you would have electron flows from the other not quite so high fibers, so that might be right next to it, might flow into the highest fiber, so that you could have two very close fibers, one being discolored and one not.
Would anybody else like to respond? Julio, did you want to say something to that? Okay. We have a couple questions from the audience out here.
Okay, I was listening to how you've focused basically on the shroud and the impact of your theories on the image, you know, your radiation impact, whether it's protons or ultraviolet. But I was just thinking, okay, if you read the Bible, and as far as I remember, you know, when the resurrection occurred, it was a big event, and it also moved the stone that covered the entrance to the tomb. So I'm wondering if you guys consider that in your analysis or your thoughts? And was there anything from your, studies and everything that you went to the tomb to see if there's any of the radiation impacts on the walls inside the tomb that might explain, maybe it was connected, this radiation impact that impacted the shroud and maybe also went into the tomb and then also impacted the stone that covered it. And is there any theories on that or ideas? So I was just thinking of that.
Good question. We're going to have several answers up here. We'll start with Mark Antonacci and then pass it down.
Bob educated me on this, and I discuss it in chapters 11 and 12 of my book. And I believe the Bible says the angel rolled the stone open. However, keep in mind it's very low radiation. It's like Art said, it's 0.4 MeV. That's about a third or less of what Ronaldo said. However, though, it's still possible. The Bible talks about 2 earthquakes, one after the crucifixion. Now that's a big one. Graves were opened. It shook so much, and the ground opened. I'm not talking about that one, but the second one talks about a mild earthquake. It doesn't knock the tomb down, but there is a little rumbling, and it kind of scares the guards. That could have been a low energy release that would be consistent about it. Again, we're not there, but it would be consistent with that. That's part of the reason, one of the many reasons I like to name it the historically consistent hypothesis. But let me pass it down.
Well, what I'd like to add in response to your question, I conclude that Bob Rucker has a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Can I just refer back to the cell cycle that I was talking about? And you may remember that I was saying that the endogenous fields within the body, they move from quasi-static fields, electrostatic and magnetostatic, and they eventually get down to the size of the base pair, the base pairs. So we're talking pretty strong fields by that stage. Where's the gentleman again? Sorry. Where was the gentleman who asked that question? Oh, there he is. He's moved around. He's gone back. So you're talking possibly what the resurrection event was. It may be that, in my opinion, that the UV event was different to the resurrection event, so that you might have been at pretty high powers into nuclear powers. I relate this back to the recent opening of the tomb, where the scientists found strange things happening to their instruments. And I've got the feeling that we might be onto another area, as you suggest, where there could be electric fields there could be something else. So are you aware that the Holy Sepulchre was opened just recently for renovation? We don't even know if that is the right tomb to be looking in. One of the talks, I forget the talk, but there was a range of possible sites. So we might be able to define the resurrection site by a possible small nuclear event. And you would get your earthquake. I don't think you are going to get 92,000 Japanese atomic bombs, because I think we are talking about a coherent nuclear like fusion, something like fusion. It's definitely not a nuclear avalanche as we use in atomic bombs.
I gave an answer a little while ago that I'd like to change. I indicated that the image would not be related to distance. Well, it really depends on the energy of the proton. If the energy of the proton is 1 MeV, 2 MeV, 0.8 MeV, what I said is true. But if the energy is like 0.4 MeV or less, then see, if it's really a high energy like 1 MeV, then as it travels through the air, it really doesn't lose much energy. But if it's 0.4 MeV and travels through the air, then it loses energy related to its path through the air, and when it reaches its destination, it has less energy than it had when it started. So it would have significantly less energy than 0.4 MeV. So it would, what I said before about not being related to distance, the image would indeed be more intense if the cloth were closer to the body than it would be if the cloth was farther from the body. So my answer before was wrong.
I hope you can follow what he's saying, but that's another reason why I'm a big fan of the cloth collapse hypothesis, because the cloth spends more time in the radiant field, and there's no way of knowing how long we're talking about. It could be up to a second or more. You don't know, but it spends more time in the field, and more parts of the cloth get it, and more protons hit the cloth.
I have to make a comment on these answers, because I have heard different answers without thinking in a general way. This is a very complex phenomenon, and we must not try to find an explanation based on our own hypothesis. I think that a new approach should be applied to the shroud studies. The so-called data fusion, information fusion, I would say. So we should put together all the information without fossilizing on one own hypothesis. I think that in this sense, perhaps we'll be able to find something better. For example, we are speaking of neutrons, but where does the neutrons come from? From the disintegration of an atom. So we have protons, neutrons, and electrons. We have not to think solo to protons or neutrons or electrons, but all together. The electrons probably cause an electric field, the protons cause perhaps a part of an image. We must consider all together, not side by side, each one.
Thank you, Giulio. Okay, here's one. This is addressed to Mark Antonacci. Oh, to that same question that was just asked? Sorry.
Yes, in the previous question, the gentleman asked the question, could the energy of the resurrection have affected the rest of the tomb, possibly rolled the rock aside and this type of thing? In the discussion that I gave you on the amount of energy that would flow into the body based upon the change in the dimensionality. Now, first of all, I want to say that this is a lower limit of how much energy the body could possibly pull into itself because of this effect. I'm not saying God couldn't put more energy than that into the body if he wanted to, But this is just strictly how much energy you would expect, just caused by the dimensionality change alone. And in my calculations, it came up to 3 trillion watts in 50 nanoseconds. Now, we had a previous gentleman here in these talks said that you could cause the discoloration on the shroud with 34 billion watts, which is 1% of the energy that I'm talking about. So if we use 1% of the energy that I'm talking about to discolor the shroud, that still leaves 99% of the energy still available to do something else. But that 99% of the energy that we say could do something else is not nearly big enough to roll that big rock aside. That would take a tremendous amount of massive energy to do that. Okay, so again, I'm saying that my hypothesis would not give you enough energy to roll the rock aside or change the rest of the tomb, but it would give you way more than enough to discolor the shroud.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't want to be pedantic, but just I did hear on the collapsing shroud, and there was a question back here about immediately and so forth. And I realize we're all speculating, but I did hear in one of the previous things is the body disappeared like a vacuum or different dimensions or so forth. But we've all collapsed cans by pulling a vacuum on them. And so consequently, there was a statement that there's no discoloration on the sides because of the collapsing theory. Has there been any discussion as to why it wouldn't be like pull a vacuum and the sides of the shroud come in and get discoloration? Or?
That's a good question. Let me combine it with one that was a written request that's very related to that, and then we'll pass the mic to Mr. Antonacci. The question is, would not collapse inward as a result of the vacuum from the disappeared body. Did you really mean disappeared body, or did you mean radiant body, the terminology that Jackson used? Please elaborate.
A radiant body that disappears. Oh, God only knows how fast. I think it's a brief amount of time, a second or less, but hey, God only knows.
Okay, good question though. Here's another question. This is for any of the panelists. The Bible says Jesus had a glorified body, which it would be assumed to be outside the laws of physics and the laws of nature as we understand them. How would that concept affect how we express what happened after the moment that the imprinting process began? Anybody?
Yes, in biblical theology, the resurrection would occur in a very brief span of time, resulting in the transition of terms that Paul used from the natural body to the spiritual body. Both of those terms have two words in them, and both of them use the word body. So in other words, the normal natural body is a body, and the spiritual body is a body. The same noun is used. It's just that the adjective changes. So what that means is that the natural body would be under the influence, under the control of the natural laws of science, the natural laws of physics. Whereas the spiritual body would be primarily under the control of the spiritual laws of the universe. And so that's what the transition is. And so that it's still a physical body where he could be felt, he could have Thomas's hands put into the holes, the wounds, he could eat fish, etc. He had a natural body. He wasn't a ghost. But that the resurrection body or the glorified body, it's just another term for it, was under the new rules of the spiritual realm, including the spirit, the mind, the decision-making power of the individual, so that when Jesus merely had to make a decision to pop in to our reality from the alternate dimensionality. It was a decision that was made based upon the new frame of reference of him possessing a spiritual body rather than a natural body.
And that explains why he can appear in the empty room or in the room with the apostles. So a question here.
Okay. I was wondering, was the head covering put on when he was on the cross or when he was taken off the cross? And also, how was he taken off the cross? And would that affect the image on the shroud?
Do we understand that? Would you state that a little differently? We didn't understand up here.
Okay, the covering on his head.
The sudarium?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was that placed when he was still on the cross or after he was taken off the cross?
Who would like to answer that? Caesar would like to answer.
Well, the analysis of forensic medicine and other branch of the science tell us that the sudarium of Oviedo was put around the head of a man who was in vertical position without life, death, and in this arrangement passed more or less an hour. But still around the head, the body, the corpse, was put face down on the floor with the sudarium around and passed in this way more or less another hour. Then a few minutes later, the body was translated and the sudarium was removed and put a little far from the head. Okay?
Okay.
This is this answers your question, no? Well, I have another question to put more question. Usually the tomb was closed Friday evening, and with what opening we have of when the body disappears. The body can disappear between the Friday and the Sunday, and maybe a little minutes after the stone closed the tomb.
Good question. We have not a sure answer, but we have some clues. As I told today, just in correspondence of the orifices like mouth, nose and ears, we see no signs of putrefaction. According to the medicine, this is an index that the man wrapped into the shroud remained into the shroud for not more than 30-40 hours, and this corresponds in the time interval between Friday evening and Sunday morning. There is another thing very interesting for me, that especially in this area, we see the blood stains without any smear. We know some medicine and experts say that a cadaver put in the sepulchre in the ambient of Jerusalem, which is quite humid, the blood stains redissolve perhaps by fibrinolysis. So the crusts were not compact, but fluid, let's say. If this man came out or was stolen, I don't know, in these 40 hours, especially in this area, should have let some smear. So there is a question, how the Turin shroud man went out from the shroud?
We have a question.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, Art?
I want to say that my interest in the shroud is practical problems that I can solve, like working with protons. To understand the resurrection and the shroud, I guess I have to refer to, I don't know the chapter and verse, but it says, by faith alone you'll be saved. And I have faith.
Question in
Thank
the
you,
audience.
Art. There's a couple more questions in the audience.
Yeah.
You'll be second. There's one back here, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
So my question is, in the book of John, chapter 19, it mentions that Nicodemus bought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. And it mentions that taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices. So the spices were in the shroud as well. I know that Sturp was looking for the spices, they couldn't find it. And by Mabalon, I believe, found some traces. It only takes 30 grams to cover a body, a human body, 30 grams. So where is the rest of the spices? Was it in bags? Does it have anything to do with the image or the configuration of the body and the cloth? Do you have any information to add? If there is spice that was identified in analysis or not? Something I don't know.
Yes, this is another problem because many writers about the shroud have perhaps too much fantasy. I touched with my hands this problem, and many researchers, so-called researchers, wrote many books in which there is some interesting facts, really, mixed with some debatable facts that are not so defined. The problem of the present or not of the species is one of these. I know that Starp, studying the sticky tapes taken from Ray Rogers, did not officially found some species like myrrh, aloes, and so on. Some other so-called researchers found instead these species. But I went to see how this material was found. This material was found searching for an object and looking at the microscope. When the researcher found something like that can seem the material under investigation, oh, I found it, I right, and so on. This is my point of view. So perhaps there are species, but I am not sure that they are really in the shroud.
Thank you, Giulio. Question here.
No, actually, I'm sorry. Now, it's not a question, three considerations. Very quick. I'll try to be very quick. The first one, considering the rolled stone, Mark, Luke, and John say that when the women, when John is Mary Magdalene and Luke and Mark arrive to the tomb, they've already found the tomb open, the stone rolled. It's only Matthew 28, I just checked, to be sure, not to say. It's only Matthew 28 that says that an angel came down from heaven and there was a big earthquake, not a small one, and he rolled the stone, and the guards got scared. First of all. Second thing, regarding the question of the gentleman who said, have been there studies about the tomb, if there are radiations hewn in the rock that belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. But at the time of Constantine the Great, since the tomb was hewn in the rock, that means it had been kind of dug in a mountain, on a rock, something that was all around it. At the time of Constantine the Great, the whole thing was practically raised to the ground. An edicule was built on top of it, and then the whole Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre was on top of it. So what is left now, practically, it's not even visible, for what I understand, at least 2 slabs on top of it. It's just the bench where the body of Christ was laid. Third consideration regarding the question of Caesar, Jesus could have just been 2 hours or 1 night or 2. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, a generation, they asked Jesus to give a sign, and Jesus says, generation of unbelievers, you are looking for a sign, but will not be given you a sign unless the sign of Jonah, the prophet. This is my personal opinion, but so I'm open to dispute. But I think that, because it says that actually, as Jonah stayed in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man would remain in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. My personal opinion is that Shroud of Turin is the sign of Jonah, that proves that Christ was dead in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. Thank you. I'm sorry I've been too long.
Good comment. I hope all heard that. I heard most of it, I think. I've been told that we're done with questions. What I would like to do personally, and I hope all you will join me, is to thank all of these presenters. We had tremendous, they're stretching. Before you clap, what they're doing is they're taking physics as far as it can go, and science and chemistry as far as it can go, to explain this inexplicable image. They're close to the boundary, but what they found is extremely significant. And I want to applaud them collectively, and now you can join me. Let's applaud their work. Cesar.
Sí, sí. Is possible last question? Yes? It's for Julio. About the double superficiality. Okay, in your paper, if I remember well, you find a good correlation between frontal and dorsal image, not dorsal, but the back side of the sheet for the face, and less in the hand area. Is that correct? Okay. But in the rest of the body, you don't find enough correlation. In my opinion, that means that the image don't pass through the cloth, because in the general body, only in the face, that happen, but not in general in the image. Then maybe we have to look for other explanation for the case of the face.
Okay, this is a good interpretation, but we have to consider another possibility. Look at the face and look at the area in the whole image, front and back. If you look at the intensity of the color in that area, these are the maximum level we have. And in particular, the maximum level is in correspondence of the tip of the nose. All the face have a general level higher than the ends, and all the rest of the image has a lower level. Why can be detected just in correspondence of the phase the double.
Yo.
And perhaps in the end, the explanation can be, it depends on the intensity of the radiation or the image. Where the image is better defined, we also are able to see something in the back. According to John Jackson, there is another interpretation that John Jackson found my same results in correspondence of the phase, but he added that according to his hypothesis, not theory, but hypothesis, the body image, the dorsal body image should not have a double superficiality. And when I wrote in my paper that the frontal image, in particular head, had double superficiality, while the dorsal image not, was very happy. He wrote to me an email informing that I have found an interesting fact and so on. We are only at the hypothesis level. But another thing I want to add, just in correspondence of the phase. The phase that is on the back side of the shroud is similar to that of the frontal image, but not equal. We have not a so good image to enter in the details, but I could, if I wish to find a similarity, I could assimilate the face on the back side to that acquired on the frontal side by infrared radiation. Why? If you look at the frontal face using different spectral ranges, the face changes. This is a not well identified fact, and I think that this could be a thing that to be studied in the future. But the differences between these faces can be very interesting.
Okay, but yes, yes. Let me give you another approach.
Yes.
I think is very simple. The image doesn't pass through, but the blood pass through the cloth.
Yes.
Then another explanation is the face has more liquid, more blood than the rest of the body. Why? Why this is maybe? Because the body was naked.
Yes.
Not a part of the body covered with tissue.
Yes.
The head.
Yes.
Then this tissue remain all the blood and all the sweat, and maybe just what enough wet the face and wet the cloth.
I add a last thing. What was put, if was put, over the shroud in correspondence of the head? Over the was put the shroud, but over the shroud was put something else. I don't know. Perhaps we can study by the intensity.
Thank you, Giulio. As you see, The conversations will go on. I want to bring up Mark Antonacci for the final comments of the conference. Mark?